everyone. Welcome to the Real Estate View. We are so excited today. I am Miki, your co-host, and I am joined with Kim and Lorraine. Hello, ladies.
Hello.
Hello. How are you, Miki? And
Very good.
Lorraine. How's everyone
Yes.
doing?
Good. Good. First I wanted to kind of start and just welcome everyone who's listening, who's joining us live. Especially I think this is our 15th or 16th episode. So definitely appreciative or happy for everyone who's been following us or listening to us so far. And even if you're new to our podcast, we do this every Thursday at 4 p.m. Eastern. So welcome.
Yes. So welcome. Yes.
And I think, anyone else who's joining us for the first time today, we actually have a special guest that Miki will be introducing in a minute. But I also wanted to point out that if you're not catching us live, you can also catch replays of all of our shows on YouTube. So be sure to like, subscribe, and share.
Yes. And so it is my honor to introduce our guest today. We are so honored to have today Scarla Pineda. Scarla is an investor and real estate broker in New York City. She has a degree in economics from Columbia University and is owner of Peace of Mind Realty, a boutique brokerage in Brooklyn. I just love that name, Scarla. Peace of mind. Like I will go with you just for the peace of mind.
Exactly.
She started her real estate investing career at age 23, everyone. 23, wow. Way ahead of me. And has since owned and sold multiple multifamily properties in New York area. Known for being an avid problem solver, she uses her think outside of the box mindset to help clients with complex real estate transactions get to the closing table and beyond. And this is really something that you're going to notice with Carla is she thinks outside of the box. With a current real estate portfolio of 10 million, she is focused on growing her family's holding across the US and Dominican Republic. She loves to read and is an experienced open water diver. She currently lives in New York with her husband and 2 sons. And so everyone, please welcome Scarla.
Hello.
Good afternoon, everyone. Hello. How are you today?
Good
Doing great. How are you?
Great. Just loving this weather in New York.
Yes. Well, thank you for being with us. We are so excited to have you on the show. So we have been thinking about you for a very, very long time and finally extending the invitation and being like, I hope she says yes. I hope she says yes. And she did. So
here I am.
Yes. So how are you, Scarla?
I am great. I think it's a very phenomenal time in real estate. The possibilities on how to get deals done are endless. And so to me, it's always about putting that puzzle together, right?
Exactly.
So it's just, I love what I do, so it doesn't feel like work.
I love that.
So Scarla, I know you're in New York. You're in one of like the most expensive markets in the world, I guess you could say. What can you tell us about the market what's going on in the New York market now that's different from anywhere else?
So, definitely because New York was at the forefront of the pandemic and we were hit pretty hard, we did experience a large amount of vacancies in Manhattan. But at the same time, as people moved out of Manhattan, it pushed the demand into the surrounding boroughs like crazy. So like the townhouse market in New York is bananas. You buy a brownstone, you renovate it, and you get multiple offers first day you put it out because people want to live in townhouses, right? Because they still have that pandemic mindset a little bit. So they're concerned about space, home office, private yard, right? And that's for the people who decided they didn't want to move out of the city. Some people did take that opportunity to move to the suburbs, but there are still a lot of people who wanted to stay in Brooklyn. And that townhouse, that $2 to $4 million townhouse market is like on fire. Like
Wow.
you can't produce enough inventory because there's just so much demand. And that's what's happened as far as how it's affected Brooklyn. Manhattan, of course, a lot of people left the city. So it has been the market that took the hardest hit.
Mm-hmm.
But now we're back into bidding war situations because, you know, the perception now is that there's still some bargains to be had in the city, and the
Yeah.
city is coming back. I always said that New Yorkers are such a resilient group of people. Like, you just can't, you're not going to kill our city that easily. Like, not
Right.
even a pandemic. We had a terrorist attack and came back. So, um, so now it's just a matter of, as life tries to regain some sense of normalcy as much as we can, um, that demand is there and people are coming into the city. I worked with some buyers who were like, a few months ago, sight unseen. They were like, if you could get me any condos for like $400,000 or $500,000 in the city, I don't need to see them. I just want to close on them because they understand the value.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. I love what you said that New Yorkers are resilient. And I think that this is a good, characteristic of yourself, Scarla. As I was reading your bio and just going like at age 23, you
Mm.
started. Can you share with us and our listeners why at 23?
So when I graduated college, I did the typical, I went to work at a law firm, wanted to, was planning on going to law school, right? And I happened to work at a firm that was started by all Columbia alum. So in a way, our firm, we worked really hard, like around the clock, but it didn't feel like work because so many of the people at the firm were like, all the partners had some sort of affiliation to the university. And
Okay.
so it kind of made you feel like you were in the boys club almost, right? Even though we were the paralegals, my friend and I. And so, it was a boutique firm that handled a lot of big cases. And so, after graduating from Columbia, I had some student loans, not a lot, but I did have some. And my mindset was, well, I don't want to go to law school owing undergraduate money,
Mm.
right? So, when all of my friends were looking at places to live in the city after college, I was like, I could kind of save more money if I go to Bushwick, which is where I grew up at, right? I know the hood, so it's not going to scare me. The hood knows me, so they're not going to be scared of me. Um, and so I had a cousin who had a rent stabilized apartment that was, I think, $300 or something like that. And so she wanted to buy a house in Philadelphia. And so I gave her her down payment so she could go to Philly.
Nice.
And so I basically bought her rent stabilized apartment. And that happens a lot in New York.
Mm-hmm.
So here I am thinking I'm sitting on top of the world because I have a $325 apartment, right? And what I didn't know at the time was that you get what you pay for, right? So with that came no heat in the winter, no hot water. It
Wow.
was
And
a
you're in New
constant.
York. It gets
Yeah.
super cold.
Yeah. So I was very lucky in that, the cases we were working on with our firm at the time, we got to stay in a lot of hotels. And then to compensate for the other days, I had joined New York Sports Club right on Wall Street because our office was at 120 Wall Street. So I'd be like, well, I'll just go to the gym and take a shower there and go to work.
Yeah. I
Right.
love the resiliency.
Uh-huh.
This is the true New York spirit. Because as you guys know, I'm from New York, and I'm just sitting here like, yep. Everything that she's saying is
It's
exactly
true.
what you do. That's awesome.
Exactly.
I'm sorry.
Like New Yorkers don't have time to complain. I mean, some do, and I probably should have called 311 or something on this lady. But I was too busy. Like I was working my buns off from all day long and then partying my ass off all night long.
Because there's always time to party. There's always time to party.
I'm making like $80,000 at 23 years old. You know, the partners at the firm would party with us all the time. Like, I remember that was the year The Matrix came out, and they rented the theater for us.
Nice.
For like 10 people to go see The Matrix, they paid for that. And then the following day, we were all in the office doing this. So it was just an amazing time. I was young, you know, no responsibilities other than my rent and my student loans. We expensed our lunches all the time. So it was like there was a lot of abundance, I guess, around me.
Yes.
And so I decided to take that opportunity and pay off my student loans. So I took this apartment. It was a 3-bedroom apartment. It was huge.
Nice. For $325?
For $325.
What's the address? I'm just out of curiosity, you know. Yeah, right. Is it still available?
That gets more interesting. So I lived in this apartment, and of course, once it started to get really cold, you know, I would call her, and like the woman, she knew our family. Like, our families had lived next door to each other for a long time. So I said to her, you know, Miss Joanne, what's going on? There's never any heat. There's never any hot water. I've still been sending you my rent. She's like, you're the only one, right? Everyone else is acting like they don't care. So I said, well, you know, what I'll do is I'll send my little $325 to the oil company, because I'd rather have oil for 15 days and have a hot shower than no hot shower at all, right? So she was like, okay. Then I tried to rile up the tenants, like, look, she's struggling, obviously. So let's just all do the right thing. Even if you're not going to pay her the rent, let's come up with the money to pay for the heat and things like that, so that no one has to suffer in the winter. Now, I'm the youngest person in the building. There were seniors, there were kids, you know, but they did not want to hear that. So then she started to get tax notices, because she had like a $16,000 water bill. She owed some taxes. I was like, no, this is the cheapest I'm ever going to live. And at that point, I had gotten some really good .com advice. This is during the .coms. So that's where I first got introduced to stocks. And one of the clients at the office, this like over the top billionaire that used to drive this yellow Lamborghini, always used to give us stock tips, like, buy this, and when it reaches this point, sell it. And like, he had all this access to information, right? Mm-hmm. And I would be like, okay, let me take a little $2,000 and turn it into 10. And, you know, so I had some savings as well. So I called her one day and I said, you know what? Why don't you sell me the building? And she was like, you know, your family would probably hate me if I did that. I said, well, my family is going to hate me for doing it anyways, because they didn't quite see what I was seeing at the time. And so it took a little bit of convincing, but she agreed to sell me the building for $90,000.
Nice.
Wow.
6 units.
Wow.
But remember, 6 units with 5 non-paying tenants. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't like the biggest prize, right? But I figured I have good gab. I'll figure it out. Like, I always figure everything out. That's always my mindset, right? I'm like, I'll figure it out. So she's like, okay, you know, but you need to go to the bank and show me that the bank is going to give you the money. So I go to the bank and the bank is like, hell no, no way, no how. And I'm like, oh man, what am I going to do? So then at the time I was dating the man who is now my husband. And I said to him, I said, look, you know, I want to buy this building and I kind of have some of the money, but I don't have all of it. And I think it's a really good opportunity. I can at least know that I can live for free while I go to law school. I mean, that was my thought, right? It was very small in terms of, I was just thinking like, well, if I don't have to pay for a dorm, because I was thinking, okay, I'll go to NYU Law, Columbia Law. So I'll be in the city. Wasn't looking to go outside of the city. So he was like, well, how much do you need? I was like $90,000. You know, just about. I didn't even know about closing costs at that point either. So he was like, all right, I'll lend it to you.
Ooh.
That's husband material right there. Mm-hmm.
I was like, for real? Like, do I have to do anything for the money? He was like, no, I'll lend you the money. So then he was like, so as I am going through this process of buying this property from this woman, I go down to DHCR, which is Community Housing and Renewal, which is what oversees rent stabilized apartments, right?
Yes.
So I go down there and I find out in my let me ask a question mindset that I was overpaying rent.
Oh.
The last legal rent that she had registered in the building was like $100 or something ridiculous like that.
325 was extra?
Overpaying.
Wow.
I was overpaying by like $100, $200. Just I don't remember exactly. So, I'm there asking millions of questions because I had asked the attorneys in my firm, and I was like, what do I need to ask? What should I say? Am I going to get in trouble? Like, he was like, no, just go ask your questions. Tell them you're buying this property. If you want, show the contract. Tell them you need the rent roll, right? So as I'm talking, there's this gentleman there as well. And he tells me, and like at 23, I looked like a little kid, right? So I'm down there talking to the woman at DHCR, and this gentleman, he's like, what is it? You manage a building? And I'm like, oh no, I'm buying it. And he's like,
yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So then he tells me, well, what are you going to do with it? I'm like, try to collect the rent that no one's paid. I guess. I mean, I'll figure that out as I go along. I haven't yet gotten to that point. He was like, let me tell you something. If you get this building empty, I will buy it from you for $300,000.
Ooh.
And I said to him, do you have a card? Right? That's a plan B. If the law school thing doesn't work and I kind of need more money for law school, because then that was the other thing. I was like, okay, with $300,000, like 200,000, I could pay for law school and not have any debt, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I take his card. He's like, but you have to get it vacant. Everyone has to leave. And I'm like, well, how do I do that? He's like, just offer them some money.
Cash for keys.
Cash for keys. That was my first introduction to cash for keys. So now I go back to my boyfriend who I am dating. Right? And I'm like, look, we can make a lot of money. Right? And he's like, you already borrowed $50K from me. I'm not even sure I'm going to get that back. I'm like, I'm good for it. Right? He's like, I'm like, but we got to convince everybody to leave. So then, we started just offering people money. That was my first introduction to getting someone an apartment, because I helped a couple of the people in the building find an apartment. There was a neighbor who couldn't stand me. So the minute she found out I owned it, she left.
Oh, that's kind of nice. Yeah,
so that works. Really nice. I was like, thank you. Bye. Don't let the door hit you on the way out. No. And then we had one tenant who was like, I don't care if you give me $1 million. I'm not going nowhere. And I'm like, you got to move. Like, lady, you're not doing this to me. But finally, I spoke to her son. Her son and I we had grown up together. Like, I grew up on this block, so they all knew me. So, so finally I spoke to her son, and he convinced her to move, right? And I think I gave him $3,000 or $4,000 or some, marginal amount of money compared to what they get now.
Yes.
And so I got my building empty 6 months later.
Nice.
And I called the gentleman and I was like, hey, like it didn't occur to me back then to say, I'm going to list this with a realtor or I'm going to shop it around. I knew he was a sure thing.
He was your buyer.
Yes.
So I went back to him. I said, hey, guess what? The building's empty now. And he's like, what you do? You killed everybody? No, I just helped them move along. I said, but it cost me some money. So now I want $450,000.
Nice.
And he said, you have yourself a deal.
And you know what I was gonna say? Even when he threw out that first 300,000, he was just thinking you didn't know what you were doing. So that was even just his, okay, let me see if she'll sell it to me for 300. So the fact that you went up a whole other 150,000, that is awesome. I just love
Well,
this
I
story.
figured I had to borrow another 50.
Yeah.
Right. Remember, this is my boyfriend, not my husband. Right.
Yeah.
He's still my boyfriend. Right. And so I figured I had to pay him and compensate him for his time and his money that he could have done other things with it. And so, you know, I mean, I definitely knew nothing about the business then. And so from there, you know, I went into contract on one house. The investor totally screwed me on this house in Brooklyn. But sometimes things happen that are just a blessing in disguise. Because then I ended up at the brownstone that I absolutely love and adore on Decatur Street. So, and that's how I got started in real estate.
So that was the way you
That's
were
incredible.
into real estate.
Wow, this
That's
is
really
so incredible because
Yeah.
it's like you jumped in no knowledge, Scarla.
Yep.
It's
But it
like
was just
you're learning along the way.
but it was the insight to say, okay, first it was the insight to say I'm not going to spend all this money on rent just to say I'm living in Manhattan or whatever. I'm going to go to maybe where it's a little bit more reasonable for me to live and still be able to save and pay off my other debt. It's just the cycle of decisions that you've made that got you to this point that's really so impressive.
So, you know, for me, and part of that is just my unique growing up story in that, you know, I was born in Dominican Republic. So I was brought to the States at 7, 8 years old, not speaking the language. Taught myself English. Well, I mean, you're young, so you can pick it up. It's not.
It's not an easy language though. So that's still impressive.
And you know, my mom died when I was a baby. So I was 2 years old when my mother died, and I was raised by my father's mother, right? My dad, it's just not customary in Dominican Republic for a man to raise his kids, like if he's by himself, especially a female child, right?
Yes.
So my dad just came to the States to work and he would send money back, but my grandmother was the one who raised me. And then when we came to the States, I lived with my grandparents at first, but then my grandfather started to get really sick and they had to move back to Dominican Republic. But my grandmother was determined that I would not be domesticated. Like she was like, I don't want you to learn how to cook and clean at the age of 6. Like, I want you to read. I want you to know how to do math. I want you to be a professional one day.
Nice.
And so, you know, at 6, when we first came here, she would make me read the English newspaper without knowing any lick of English and the Spanish newspaper at the same time because she wanted to make sure that I was learning both languages. And so when they went back to Dominican Republic, she left me in the care of my aunt. And that was a bit of a difficult relationship for me. And so at 13, and then after like 2nd or 3rd grade, they realized I was just really smart. So the school sent me to a gifted school because at the current school, I was just being a distraction because I wasn't learning. And a teacher, thank God, saw that, you know, I was just a little bit smarter than your average kid in that class. And so she sent me to a gifted program. And then from there, you know, I've just always had this, like, from that opportunity of just going to a different school, I kind of understood that I could change my own circumstances. So then at 13, when I just felt like things at my aunt's house were just not going to lead me to where I envisioned me to be, I applied for boarding school by myself because she said no. And I did everything behind her back. I took the test. I went to the interviews. They asked me, well, where's your parent? I was like, oh, she had to work today. So, you know, at 13, I went to boarding school. And so I think from there, it just evolved that I'm just very independent. And where there's a will, there's a way. There's just, I can't say that enough for anyone who's listening, that definitely if you have the will, you'll find a way. Because
Right.
I've done it over and over and over in my life.
And it seems like you move with purpose and intention.
Yes.
You know, and that's amazing.
Right. I'm always thinking about, what's the outcome? What's my desired outcome? Where do I want to be? What's the goal? How can I be a better human being and how to achieve that? Because we can all think of ways that we could be better, but it's not everyone can do that. It's decompressing that to, okay, do I need to read these books? Do I need to, maybe have different friends? Do I need to then surround myself with a different community? Just that's just who I've always been, or maybe who I've grown into to be based on the circumstances I've been placed in. And so, that's my thing. Like, if I don't know something, I have no problem calling an expert and saying, hey, this is Scarla Pineda, and I saw your podcast, and how are you doing today? Listen, I have a question for you. I'm not sure about this thing or whatever. Like, I will call an architect, an attorney. I have so many attorneys that take my calls because they like to get questions.
They do?
Right? They do. They do. They like to be presented with like challenging things. And so I'll call them to say, I have this problem. Maybe you can help me walk through it, and then I'm always thankful, and I always try to refer business. So it pays for them, right? And so that's just how for me, this is how I've managed to grow and just kind of always have this idea that, you know what, even if I don't know it, I'm going to figure it out.
I think you touched upon, and I'm sorry, I was just going to say, I think Scarla, you touched upon something really interesting, because I'm similar in terms of if I don't know something, I don't have a problem going to seek it. But something that you said about asking the questions of certain professionals, and I find, or I'm starting to find, that people like to talk about something that they know a lot about. So it's not really just, oh, I'm just asking you questions to pick your brain. It's like, oh, I actually like talking about this. I actually like being seen as the subject matter expert, or the go-to person for this particular area. So I think that what you just said is really interesting, and I'm starting to recognize that myself. But as I'm talking to different people, that you really aren't bothering them. Like, it makes them feel good, or gives them a level of purpose when you're asking, so tell me what you think about this, or tell me what you think about that. What about the moratorium, or what about foreclosures, or whatever? All of these things, it not only provides value to you, but it helps them out at the same time. So I thought that's really interesting.
And I think that when you give experts the opportunity to ask them questions, it better helps them to formulate their arguments, right?
Absolutely.
And and me, I tend to want to always ask like a difficult question, like, can we do this? And they're like, no, we can't. I'm like, okay, well, what about if we approach it this way? And what about if we go this route? Or what about if we go this route? And it's an exercise in kind of, working your brain, right? Because people call me all the time with real estate transactions that are just like impossible. And I'm like, no, let's think this through, right? If we can't do this, can we then let's talk to title about A, B, C, and D. Can this be done? Okay, we're having some sort of lot line dispute. Okay, let's contact the neighbor. Maybe it's just as simple as talking it over with the neighbor, right? Before it gets to litigation or something like that. So this has been my experience, right? That experts do like to talk about their stuff. One of the people that I talk to often is Jimmy Lathrop, who's the president of the foreclosure bar in New York, right? And he is this like kick-ass foreclosure attorney. I mean, he doesn't just do foreclosures, but he really understands them in a way that other people do not, that I have found. And so I call him all the time, and I also refer him business because to me, I never want someone to feel like, oh, she's always calling me to problem solve, but she's never calling me to say, here's a
Help this
client for you to
person. Yeah.
represent, right?
Yeah.
So, but when I speak to him, I always get so much insight and so much value out of the conversation. And, that's something that I'm always so appreciative for because he really helps me with my clients or even with my own stuff. If I'm buying something and there's an open foreclosure, I'm calling him before I call anybody else to say, okay, what would be the defense here? Because he really understands the process very well from the court's perspective.
Yeah.
Right. And it's important to have somebody like that on your side, because we've talked in the past about key players on your team, and he sounds like he is definitely a key person that you can go to whenever you need him for that particular type of transaction. And Scarlett, you've had a long career since 23 years old. I know that in business there's a lot of ups and downs. So can you share any kinds, your wins, your losses, any kind of anything like that?
Woof. I've had some losses. I've definitely had some losses. My first loss was with the property that I was looking to buy right after I sold the property in Brooklyn.
Mm-hmm.
And I was buying it from a developer, very young. I was still probably 23 or had just turned 24. And, I went to this developer. I said, listen, I want a renovated house. It was this one particular house. It was in Prospect Heights. So it was on Bergen Street. And when I first saw it, it was like in shambles. And we negotiated a price. He actually recommended an attorney. That was like, he was like, look, if you use the attorney I give you, you only gonna have to pay $1,500, right?
Mm.
And at that point, I was kind of feeling myself. So I was like, I don't want to bother the attorneys at my firm. Like, this is like not stuff that they would do, right? These guys are negotiating $1 million settlements. They're not going to want to represent me on the purchase of a house. So I took his advice and used the attorney that he gave me. And months came and months went. And, one of the things that we negotiated was that I would provide the cabinets, the tile work for the bathrooms and kitchens, just kind of like the finishing stuff, because I wanted a high-end product, right?
I don't mean to, were you guys JVing on this? Was this like a joint venture or?
No, it wasn't a joint venture. He was customizing the house for my taste, right? I was buying it.
Okay.
And I was financing a small portion because I wanted to keep the rest of the cash for law school. So, we get to the end and I'm like, okay, let's close. I'm ready. The bank's ready, whatever. And like for weeks, he's like, oh, we need to do this. We need to do that, whatever. And then I get a call one day and he's like, well, there was a title issue and we can't close because there may be a grandson of the person I bought it from. And, I'm the last person that thinks that someone is a liar, right? Because I choose to believe that everyone I deal with is showing me their best light. It's who I am, right? So I'm like, okay, I guess we have to start over. Little did I know he had basically sold the house to somebody else for more money because this woman came, she saw the house, she loved the kitchen and the bathrooms that I had decorated and offered him more money. And the attorney that was there that I had used was in on it.
Mm.
So, that was my first loss. I didn't lose money though, because at that point, David and I were kind of like going really strong because he figured, okay, she's a money maker. I'm not gonna let this girl go.
She paid me my 50,000 back. I'm in this for the long haul.
I'm in this for. She's a keeper.
That's right.
So, David is former law enforcement, has all this huge military background. So he got on the phone. I was in tears. I was just like, and we found out because when we were going to the house all the time while it was being renovated. And so we had met another police officer on the block who told us, well, when you guys get ready to buy and purchase, I'll rent the apartment upstairs from you. And I was like, this is great. 2 guys in law enforcement in the house. Ain't nobody coming up in here. So, and the guy called me one day and said, hey, I thought you were going to rent me the apartment. Why are you having people move in? And you never even got back to me. Like, you never called to me. And I was like, no, there's an issue with that house. We weren't able to buy it. I said, but someone's moving in. So I went over there. The woman was like, yeah, I love this kitchen. Blah, blah, blah. It was so great. I gave him like $100,000 more. Blah, blah. And I was like, blah, blah. So David had to be David and was like, you need to give her back every penny that she spent. Or, you know how it gets in New York, right? Like,
yep. Yes, I do.
Like, you're not doing this to her. And I'm not waiting for a lawyer to settle it. And so the guy got scared and gave me back my money. But then I was back to square one. So then at that point, I was like, forget the financing, forget anything. I picked up the phone. I called the realtor and I was like, this is what I want. I want a house that in 2 weeks from today, I can move into. And I have the cash. And that's how I ended up. So that was my first kind of experience in dealing with real estate and investors. Okay. Then fast forward, as I started to rent out my own units and, just dealing with that. And then neighbors would ask me like, oh, how'd you get your tenants? And I'm like, oh, I did this, I did that, whatever. My first couple of tenants were Section 8 tenants. And I dealt with all the problems that come with that. But, you live and you learn. I had one woman, actually, she lived with me for like 12 years. Oh, and wow. she was a Section 8 tenant. Wow. And they were great. We got along very well. They paid their rent on time, their share of the rent on time. Mm-hmm. When I didn't like something, I would say it. She would rectify and we would be happy. I never bothered her upstairs. She never bothered me downstairs. So live and let live. And so as that happened, I started to become more interested in real estate and just other people would come to me with problems like, hey, I have this house, I'm not paying it. And I'm like, well, how much do you owe? And they would be like, oh, I owe $10,000 in taxes. And I'd be like, I'll give you $20,000 for the house. I mean, I knew nothing about real estate. So I was just like, if I can give you $20,000, then you take it. That's your problem.
So you just throw numbers out there.
Yeah, I would just be like, I'll give you $20,000. Because my mindset was, okay, if I could rent it, I get my $20,000 back in a year. And then
it's like
the rest is icing on the cake.
Scarla, from the beginning, you had already understood like the tenant and landlord relationship, right, and how to get your money back.
Right.
You got that part already. Like this one,
I have to give credit to David, my husband, in that because he was former law enforcement, he wasn't scared of a tenant. Never has been, never will be. Right. So, and he has a way of talking to people with command because he's an officer. Mm-hmm. So he would come in and tell people like, look, I'm gonna give you $2,000. You need to be out by the end of the month. I will get, and very nice. Like, it's not like he threatens people or threatened anyone, but he just had a way that people just kind of understood. This isn't the guy I want to piss off. Yes. Right. And so he would come in and say, listen, I will get you the bags. I'll get you the moving truck. I'll even get the guys to move your stuff out, but you leave them.
So what you're saying is you had an enforcer on your team. That's probably the keyest person on the team. You had an enforcer.
We had good cop, bad cop.
That's right.
This is what we played, right? We could never both be the same person in the room. And to this day, this is who we are. So it's like, if you're going to play bad cop today, I got to be the nice one. or vice versa.
That's
So
good teamwork. Good teamwork.
very good teamwork. This is why we're still married. Because I always tell him my kind of crazy
I
just
love it.
relates to your kind of crazy.
I love it.
So, and then as over the years, as we got to know people, we purchased homes from people that were just moving on to other stages in their life. And as far as a big major loss was one of our neighbors came to us and said to us, I'm moving to Baltimore.
Yeah, my market.
And,
Miki said,
and
come on down. Come
Yes.
on.
back then you could kind of buy a deed from people, and that's the route we decided to go because we were like, oh, she's a neighbor, no problem. Needless to say, I lost $1 million.
Oh my.
One
Right?
1 million? 1 million.
$1 million.
Million with
What
an
Yeah,
what
M.
because by
year
the
was
time I was
that?
done with the property and had to take the loss, it was like $1 million because the property had appreciated. We had renovated it out of our own pocket. Because early on, I mean, it isn't until recently that I borrowed other people's money. I always did things with my own money because I was like, if it goes left, I don't default on my word with anyone, just to
Right.
myself.
The onus
Um,
is on you. Yeah.
so that was a loss, a big loss for me. And it wasn't even so much the money, it was just the fact that they misrepresented a lot of things, and then they lied, and then it got into litigation. And, ultimately, my attorney sat me down and was like, Scarla, you're building yourself an empire. He called it an empire. I'm like, my little portfolio, right? He's like, you're very smart. You got to allow yourself to see past this. This is a business transaction. Don't take it personal. Because I took it personal. I was like, yeah, some fucking liars. And to me, I like, you want to get me riled up, lie about something, to my face about
Mhm.
something with disgust where I know I'm telling the truth. It's like, it's a whole other person comes out in me. So, but he was like, just, I suggest you let this go before it gets even uglier. And you could fight this. It's going to take you like 5 years. You're going to spend so much money on litigation, and you could turn around tomorrow and buy another house. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to take my losses. But I was angry. I had this like dark cloud, like in the cartoons where like the
Yes.
character walks with the dark cloud with the storm and the lightning over my head. And, it took a lot of internal talking to myself to say, no, I'm going to let this go. I'm going to give it back to the universe. Because I was
Mm.
thinking, like, what are legal ways of revenge?
Yeah.
You know,
Yep.
like, okay. I mean, your mind could go to really crazy places
Really
if you let it. But ultimately, I told myself, I'm going to let this go. Let the universe handle it. Let them take it. I wish them no harm. I wish them no ill. I just will never mess with them ever again with those people. And so, because literally the house was like 5 houses from my house. So it's on the same block.
Mm.
But you live and you learn, you take your losses. And you know what? I spent the whole year being negative and just being angry. And the minute I decided to let it go, my phone was ringing off the hook with deals, with people, with like everybody wanted to talk to Scarla about some real estate transaction, whether it was for the brokerage or whether it was for an investment. And so at that point, I was like, you know what? I let this go, and the universe is rewarding me for letting it go. So there's something to be said about just cut ties with certain things and move on.
I love that story. You have shared with that to me a few months ago, and it stick with me because this is so true, right? Any negative energy that we nurture is just gonna attract more negative energy, even if it wasn't our fault, right? Because this wasn't your fault. But the
Right.
negative energy that it's producing into your mind, your thoughts, then you're just like attracting other negative things. And it's just becoming bigger and bigger. And I just think how brave you were of letting go of that 1 million
Yeah.
bucks. And Scarla, if we asked you today, have you made more than that since?
Absolutely.
See,
Absolutely.
it's just so wonderful. Like, because, when things like that happen, not that I've lost 1 million, or 1 million, but,
But I mean, to quantify it, I lost a property that was worth $1 million,
yes,
right? So
yes,
I always tell people this: I'm very house rich and super cash poor. So and I don't have a problem telling people that, because when I get money, substantial amounts of money that come across me from my brokerage or from other deals that I do, I buy another property.
Mhm.
That's just
well, that's
how I
how you
like
do
to
it. Yes,
pay myself back, right? I'm like, oh, I'll buy another building and then that building can pay me. So, or like, I always am sitting my money into like a real estate project.
yes,
Um, but you just have to let that go, because that negative energy tends to consume like your possibilities,
yes.
right? And so, and if you don't let it go, you can't see. Like, I was at a point where I couldn't see past like
Mm.
anything else. I hated people. I hated all the real estate people in my neighborhood. I was like, I don't need anybody, right? I had that I don't need anyone mindset. And it wasn't until I said, I'm gonna let this go and make my peace with it. And for the longest time I wouldn't even tell the story, because part of me was like, I'm so ashamed. Like, no one's gonna want to do business with me because I took a loss,
Mhm.
you know? And um, Andrea Lane said something the other night on a Zoom call that was very true. She's like, if I'm interviewing a potential partner and they're telling me all the great things they've done and they're not admitting to ever having had a loss, that's no one I ever want to be in
Yeah.
business with,
Yep.
Mm,
because you have to learn how to pick yourself back up.
Exactly.
exactly.
I think that's a real feeling. And if I could just jump in here, I think as women, we often not only put extra pressure on ourselves to say, okay, I have to do this perfectly, or I'm going to be looked at as a quote unquote failure or whatever it is, but also at the same time, we have so much pressure on ourselves to perform. So it's like, okay, if I admit that I did something and I didn't follow through, or it didn't work out the way I wanted to, it's like you said, well, who's going to want to work with me? But then it's the flip side of that. It's people are going to want to work with you because you've learned. I mean, I can't even count on two hands probably how many lessons you learned from just that one transaction, to the point where something like that is never going to happen to you again
Oh
because
no,
of what
because
you learned. And
Yeah.
that's mainly why someone wants to work with another individual who has gone through a loss, because depending on how drastic or how great that loss is, you're never going to allow that incident or that particular situation to happen again. So you're not going to become better by always winning. Not to say that it's not good to win, but you sometimes need to have a loss to kind of bring you back on level and say, okay, how did we get there and how do I prevent myself from going back to that place? So I think it's really important and really encouraging that you're not only sharing all of the great things that you've experienced in your career, but also the fact that, hey, sometimes things don't go to plan. As much as you do everything that you're supposed to do on your end, there are going to be some people out there who don't have the best intentions.
exactly.
And so sometimes you run into those people, and it's not to any fault of your own, but it does happen.
Right. And
Right.
you're
And
having
I'm
the
sorry.
ability it's okay. And you having the ability to pivot and just knowing when to walk away, and also having those people in your corner like David and your attorney. I mean, that's pretty amazing, because a lot of people don't have people like that on
Yeah.
their side. People to give them good solid advice.
Exactly. And that was the lesson from that transaction, that I felt like, because I thought I knew so much, I dictated so many of the terms to the attorney, and the attorney was like, "You sure you want to do it this way?" And I was like, "Yeah. I know these people, right? I'll never make that mistake."
Mhm.
I always ask my attorney, like, "Let's walk this through. Where are the pitfalls? How can we wrap up this contract so it's tighter, so that I'm more protected?" You know, and one of the things, like with that transaction, we used our names. Oh no,
Ah.
actually we did not. Actually, we did not. That was what actually saved me from being in more trouble, actually. That we did put it in an LLC, but it made me realize that there had been transactions in the past where I had just bought in my own name.
Mm.
Right. And I'm like, you can't, you just have to, like, there's no shortcuts when it comes to covering your ass. Right. And so that was the lesson for me, because I kind of thought, oh, everything is doable. You could always amend it later or whatever the case may be. But I learned, like, no, you have to do it right from the start, right? Have an entity, a separate entity for every property. Now I wouldn't buy anything that wasn't in an LLC.
Mhm. Mhm. Mhm.
Absolutely.
I feel like we could go first, but just based on your experience, we can keep going and going, because I don't even think we
For
scratched the
hours.
surface on all of the experience and the knowledge that you have within real estate, and then also talking about just the business foundationals. I mean, you started real estate really young. I'm sure all of the behind the scenes, or all of the things that need to be done to even just start and run a business weren't even explained to you. I'm still learning all of these nuances that go into how to actually run a business. It's not just doing real estate. It's not just flipping houses. Like, you're running a business, and like you said before, you're building an empire. And so there's a lot that goes into that.
And I think that's something that is endemic of society, of communities of color, right?
Mhm.
Money,
Yep.
money behavior, and how you treat a business, you learn from your family,
Yep.
from whatever family unit you grow up in. I grew up in a household where there was a lot of chaos around finances, which is also part of the reason why I always wanted to have my own place. Because I remember being like 12 or something like that, and seeing an eviction notice on the door
Mm.
while my aunt was in Dominican Republic. She was out of
That's
town. I was
scary.
home alone,
That's
pretty much.
scary.
And so I never want to. I've always said this, and I even used to say it to her when she was alive. Like, I never want to find myself in that predicament ever again. Right. And so, we do not teach our kids, and our kids are not surrounded by environments where businesses are being run effectively, where, you open up an entity, a corporate entity, you're supposed to have resolutions. You're supposed to do your meetings every year, right? There should be a secretary recording the meetings. This is the plan for this company for the year. You should be running a budget. Like, these are all the things that no one talks about. And it affects whatever business you're doing, whether it's real estate, whether you're selling hair, whether
Yep.
you're putting up eyelashes, you're taking money from somebody for a service, you're running a business.
Yep.
Oh
And
yeah.
people just do not understand that. And then, the government comes a calling like, hey, you collected $100,000 on PayPal.
Yep.
Guess what? They track all of that.
Mhm.
They do. Time for taxes.
Time for taxes. And it's like, what do you mean taxes? Oh, that thing. And now you didn't budget for that.
Yeah.
And so, it's so important. Like, it's not just buying and selling houses, but it's also educating yourself. The
Yep.
SBA has a lot of powerful webinars that you could jump on, that teach you more about running a business, or any local small business administration. Like, there's one in every state. They provide these services for free,
Yep.
this kind of education, because they don't want you to fall into those pitfalls of not doing your taxes, or not running your business the way it should be run.
Yeah.
So Scarla, if anybody wants to reach out to you, to get in touch with you, to ask any questions or to do business, how can they get in touch with you?
Sure. I'm Scarla Pineda. Should I put it in the chat?
Yes. So first, yes, please share all of your contact information with the audience. And then we're going to make sure that your information is in the comment section of the replay video as well.
Yes.
Okay.
So thank you 1,000 times, Scarla, for coming.
This was amazing.
On the podcast with us. We love your story and the inspiration that you give us and give to our listeners.
Yep.
So thank you so much.
No, thank you for having me. I really appreciate. To anyone listening, I can't tell you enough. Educate yourself, build your team.
Yes.
And rely on the advice of your experts.
Yes, that's great. It's perfect. It's perfect
Nothing,
advice.
Nothing more to say. Drop
it.
it.
That's it.
Mic drop.
And
love it.
everybody. We will be back next Thursday at 4:00 p.m. Eastern. Scarla, thank you so much for sharing all of your wisdom. And even though you had some setbacks, you know, it's still a learning experience, and that's what they're for, you know, for us to learn from and to not repeat it. So until next Thursday, guys.
And just really quick, I'm looking at the comments. Everyone is saying you dropped a lot of nuggets today, Scarla. So thank you so much for all the information.
Okay, thank you. It was a pleasure being on.
Yes.
Okay, guys. So until next week, know your why.
Know your heart.
And know your purpose. Thanks for joining.
Thanks, Scarla.
Bye. Bye, Scarla.